As you can see, I've decided to open my book and get you guys primed for success because Evie's speech was just really empowering, and I thought that was so perfect that she would be talking about how to have the best types of influence on people. And yeah, so I just was going to prime you a little bit, and hopefully that you guys are ready and open to receive this conversation about toxic relationships that probably permeate through all aspects of your life. So I wanted to first start off by asking the question, and please leave your comments in the chat box. Who here, who in this group either knows somebody who's had a toxic relationship or has had a toxic relationship themselves, and who were the people that were toxic in your life? You know, these relationships they know no bounds. They infiltrate and influence all aspects of where we live, where we are, who we are around, whether it's, someone says friends, got rid of them. You've experienced them both personally and professionally. I mean, they are everywhere. I, unfortunately, have had the pleasure of being in toxic relationships romantically, more than one. Men, yeah, I see somebody else said men, family, old managers. Yeah, girl, I'm right there too with you. My bosses, I attracted a narcissistic, toxic roommate once. It all stemmed from my family of origin and the dynamics that kind of played there. So toxic relationships and understanding how to navigate them are just so important. And that's why we're having this conversation today. A lot of the women who end up coming to seek me out typically have a layer of toxic relationships kind of permeating throughout all areas of their life. And what I've discovered in most of these relationships, that it all typically started primary from some event or experience that happened in childhood. And I want to kind of first, because I know that toxic can be probably a misused term. And so I wanted to identify what toxic relationship means and what it looks like. So a toxic relationship is any relationship that doesn't have a layer of mutual respect, whether it's emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, financial abuse, and any form or layer of that. And again, this can happen with friends, boyfriends, parents, managers, career, all these different layers. So what you want to do is that, you know, where in your life are you struggling the most with toxic relationships and why? Because what I found to be so true is that the people who come to groups like this are the most amazing women who are driven towards success and just want to do well and help spread their gifts with the world. And sometimes when that happens, when you're so giving of your talents to everyone, you can sometimes get taken advantage of. And what is the most hard and the most difficult thing that a lot of the women that I work with suffer from is this bouts of shame. So my clients will come to me and they'll be like, Brittany, I just can't believe I allowed this toxic person to come into my life over and over again. It's like the same person in a different body every single time I date someone or I encounter a new, manager or a boss, and it's so frustrating. And so let's talk about shame a little bit and how important and how devastating shame is to our system. If any of you guys are part of like the self-development world, personal development world, I'm sure you've heard of Brene Brown, Dr. Brene Brown. She is amazing. She's an author, speaker, historian is what she likes to call herself, and a professor at U of H in Houston, Texas. And she has studied shame and vulnerability for 20 years or something. And what she discovered is that women hold the most shame around not being able to keep it all together. Who here feels a lot of shame whenever part of your life kind of drops the ball? I'm going to just say this. I had a little bit of a moment because obviously the climate that we're living in right now, it's a little overwhelming. But I had a bit of a moment the other day when I went and I saw my plants and they were like dying. And I was like, what did I do? Why didn't I take care of my plants, right? And so I had this immense amount of shame that came up just because I didn't water my plants, and that's just to show you how shame just permeates through our ability to speak up, our ability to share, where maybe parts of our life are not working out, especially if we are, you know, successful, career-driven women who are struggling in relationship, and we just don't understand or know why. Because that is the truth. A lot of the time, we don't understand why we have success in all these other areas, and then yet in our personal lives, you know, or a life with a, you know, a boss or something like that, or a friend group, why we can't seem to translate that same level of success. And so this whole Rosie the Riveter syndrome of shame and guilt and feeling like less than, I feel like is partially a societal problem. And then it also is a systemic problem. Systemic meaning from your family of origin. Understanding the toxic remnants that maybe you're carrying on into your current reality as an adult. So let's talk about what do we do about it, right? It's one thing to accept and acknowledge that it exists. Now we want to talk about, like, what do we do about these toxic relationships that happen to come into our lives, right? We're trying to detoxify our toxic relationship world, and how do we make it better and healthy? So first thing you want to do is you're going to want to recognize the types of toxic people that you keep encountering and how they might mirror and mimic some of the relationships that you had with maybe in your primary life. So do your boyfriends all seem very similar to your father? Are your girlfriends very similar to your mother? Do you have a boss that's like you know, an uncle or something like that? You know, anything, or do you see sibling dynamics within your friends? A lot of times we naturally gravitate towards that which is familiar, even if we're not doing it consciously. Our subconscious makes up 90% of our brain matter. And so if you are consciously making choices, you might not realize that your subconscious is actually what's driving you to make certain choices. You think it's partially your choice, but really your subconscious is what's driving you there. And so if you can identify what these toxic relationships that you currently have in common with something from your past, then it at least will give you that awareness so that you feel like you have a little bit more control of when you're being triggered and why you're being triggered. So 2, and this one I love because I think it was so perfect from our last speaker, Evie, what she was talking about as far as like priming someone and doing these like subconscious cues. And one thing I found to be so helpful, in fact, it's truly what I did in order to land my fiance, because you know, that's why I had to manipulate him a little bit. I'm just kidding. Was because I used healthy relationships in the world to prime my subconscious for what I wanted. And personally, I didn't have any healthy relationships in my family dynamic. So a little bit about my family. I'm a child of a narcissist. If any of you guys are out there and you also have narcissistic parents, you know, just give me a shout out. And yeah, and so living with that, the eggshells and the anxiety and seeing my parents constantly fight was really difficult. And so I never quite understood what it meant to have healthy relationships. And I also, in my friend group, even though they had maybe they were married or whatever, they weren't necessarily the relationships that I desired. They didn't look like what I wanted. And so I had to find some, I guess, subconscious primers outside of reality. And so I looked at a couple TV shows that I really valued. So if you've ever heard of This Is Us, This Is Us is that show. I think it's on NBC, and they have so many, like the whole show is about relationships, but they have a multitude of relationships that I just found to be so realistic and valuable. And I was like, you know what, that's the relationship that I want. So I kind of picked from there. And then another thing I did was I picked from Madam Secretary. I don't really watch that show, but I really loved the way that she and her husband, their dynamic, and it felt really realistic to me. And because I got clear about what a relationship looked like that I desired, it made it a lot easier for me to subconsciously start attracting that into my life. And so you could do this with any relationship. So are there friendships? Like, do you want, this is so silly, but do you want friends like that show Friends? Like, do you wish that your relationships were like that? Or do you wish that you and your boss had a relationship like, you know, someone else that you can think of? And just use that as a frame of mind. If you need a little bit of help, you know, kind of getting an eye on it all the time, print out pictures, post pictures on your mirror, put them somewhere where you'll see them, so you're constantly subconsciously giving yourself that cue to, that's the relationship that you want to go after, so that you don't keep attracting the wrong types of relationships like your family dynamics from before. I did see that you have a question. Oh, okay. Okay, so never mind. That was Catherine. Let's see. So 3, you want to trust your gut. You know, a lot of times, everybody, hindsight is 20/20. It's really easy to be like, oh, I should have trusted my gut in that one, or that instant. But we should really be trusting our instincts. We should be trusting our gut. If your gut is giving that little bit of a ping that says, this relationship is not good, this is not a healthy relationship for you, you should probably do something different, then you're going to want to listen to that. And the way that you can listen to that is that immediate response that you get. You know, most of us have some physical symptom whenever we are encountering something that causes us anxiety, or encountering something that reminds us or triggers us or whatever. And so what is that physical symptom? And if you have that physical symptom and you get that thing, so like I can feel, I don't know, it almost feels like hollowness, like in my gut, whenever I know that I'm encountering something that isn't vibrating with where I'm headed or what I want out of life. And I listen to that. You know, I've learned to trust it. And when you can learn to trust your gut, then it's a lot easier for you to navigate around and through these toxic relationships. And I think one of the greatest things, again, going back, Catherine, great job layering Evie with us. You know, laying Evie with me, because I just feel like she had so many wonderful points that were very congruent with what I'm talking about as well. Because the number 4 point is facing your fears and speaking your truth. And, you know, Evie was talking about if you have to write it out, you know, write out what you want to say to the person that you are experiencing a toxic relationship from. I am under the assumption that communication is pretty much the number 1 reason why most people have horrible relationships. Now, not everyone's going to be assertive, and not everyone's going to receive your assertiveness, and that's okay. But at least if you know that you've done all that you could by communicating effectively to the person you are struggling in relationship with, if you actually articulate those things, then, I mean, what more could you ask for? That's you facing your fear. The more you face your fear, the more confident you become. The more you allow yourself to not tolerate that treatment. And I, you know, in my worldview, because again, I work majority with like spiritual kind of women, is that the more you face your fear, the more you let go of that karmic cycle, right? You're facing it head on. You no longer have to go through that lesson again. Because most of the time, the lessons that we receive in our toxic relationships are just lessons that we needed to heal from childhood. And so addressing that and facing it on, and if you're nervous, writing out the letter, writing out what you want to say and presenting that to someone. I actually had a really good friend of mine, and she was coming to me and asking me about her boss and their toxic relationship. And she's like, what do I do? Like, I don't feel like he's hearing me. I don't really know how to be assertive in this stance. We just are missing the mark. And I told her, I was like, just write out everything you want to say, and then come to him and ask him if he's okay with receiving it. And then bring your paper in and sit there and actually write it out, read it out. You know, you don't have to be ashamed to read something that you wrote to someone so that you don't forget everything, all the bullet points, all the things that really matter and that are important in that level of communication with someone who you feel has created a toxic environment for you or created a toxic relationship. So these things are going to be really helpful. And, you know, I would say the biggest thing out of all is just understanding that you have the power to choose. You have the power to choose whether or not you want to be in relationship with someone or out of relationship with someone. The best advice my mother ever gave me, because my mother, she's also a marriage and family therapist, just like I am. I'm a marriage and family therapist, but I turned to and became a relationship coach. And my mother, she told me, she's like, judge somebody, just sit back and observe how people operate in the world. And then you can make an assessment of whether or not you want that in your life or not. And I was like, huh, mother, that's so simple, you know, and simple doesn't mean easy, but it was simple enough for me to understand that I have this beautiful gift of power, and that power lies in my choice. And my choice is I can choose to engage with somebody or not engage with somebody. I can choose to allow somebody to absorb all of my energy and keep trying to bang my head against the wall, getting them to understand my truth and understand where I'm coming from. Or I could just be like, yeah, okay, that's not my energy. I don't need to waste it on that situation. I'm okay. So yeah, I just, you know, this is kind of short and sweet because I feel like I want to save a lot of time for your questions. And I see, so Mallory asked me one question. She said, yeah, so okay, so she asked whether or not she should do this letter writing with her parents. And I say 100%. However, it is very important to prep the recipient of any sort of confrontation or conflict or whatever. If you don't sit and actually prep your parents to receive this letter, then they might not be as open, you know, so maybe you want to take some of the tools and open a door, open a window, open a book and set it and just make them like visually realize like, I need you to be open, I need you to receive. I would say that. But if your parents are pretty toxic because of their own journey and their own history, I would personally write this letter and then I would release it. It can be very cathartic just to write the letter to the person who has harmed you and hurt you emotionally versus actually reading it to them, because sometimes reading it to them can cause more harm than good. So writing it out is actually a really cathartic way to purge that energy and not allow it to consume you anymore, get all of your thoughts out on paper, and then I would just destroy it. I would release it. I would send it to the heavens or whatever. And just allow yourself to kind of purge in that regard. So hopefully that answered your question.